I'm Molly, 34 female. I live alone in a quiet suburban condo that I bought with my own savings, working as a cybersecurity analyst for a major financial institution. My life is structured, logical, and secure, a stark contrast to the chaotic financial lives of my family. For years, I've been the responsible one, the emergency contact, the quiet provider, which is how a single late-night text from my nephew about a snack purchase spiraled into a $10,000 disaster and the complete implosion of our family dynamic. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. My family operates on an unwritten rule: when in doubt, ask Molly. This wasn't a role I auditioned for. It was assigned to me the day I landed my first stable job. I was the one who understood things like interest rates, credit scores, and the critical importance of not spending money you don't have. My younger sister, Jenna, a 31-year-old part-time yoga instructor, lived a life dictated by vibes and fleeting passions, which rarely translated into a consistent income. My mother, Diane, a 65-year-old retired bank teller, should have known better, but her maternal instinct was to enable rather than enforce. She saw Jenna's financial instability not as a character flaw, but as a charming, artistic quirk. And so, the burden fell to me. It started small. A few years ago, Jenna needed help covering her rent. "Just until I get my next big event," she'd say, referring to a sporadic gig planning wellness retreats. I paid it, and she eventually paid me back, minus $100 she forgot. Then it was a car repair. Then a deposit for a new apartment after she decided her old one had bad energy. Each time, I'd provide the money with a gentle lecture about budgeting, which she would absorb with a serene, patient smile before immediately disregarding it. My mother would always call me afterward. "Be kind to your sister, Molly," she'd advise. "She's a free spirit. Not everyone can be a planner like you." The dynamic solidified. I became the unofficial family bank, the emergency fund, and the financial advisor they never listened to. To make things easier, they suggested I be added to their accounts. It was my mother's idea, born from a time Jenna overdrafted her account and couldn't afford groceries for her son, Leo. "If you could just see her balance, Molly," my mom had pleaded, "you could move a little money over before she gets into trouble. It would save her all that embarrassment." Reluctantly, I agreed. As a cybersecurity analyst, linking my digital life to theirs felt like intentionally exposing my encrypted network to a known virus. I set up alerts, firewalls, and two-factor authentication on everything. I gave them a detailed tutorial on digital security, explaining the importance of strong passwords and recognizing phishing scams. Jenna had zoned out halfway through, scrolling through her phone, while my mother patted my hand and said, "It's a good thing we have you to worry about all this technical stuff." The arrangement created a fragile peace. I could monitor their spending from a distance and intervene when necessary. I would transfer money for bills, ensuring their electricity wasn't cut off, and then deduct it from the monthly allowance I had started giving Jenna, a sum she considered support, and I considered a long-term, interest-free loan with no hope of repayment. My access was supposed to be a safety net, a last line of defense, but for Jenna, it became a convenience. Instead of managing her money, she simply outsourced the anxiety to me. If she was running low, she knew I'd get an alert and fix it. She stopped checking her balance altogether. My nephew Leo was 12, a good kid caught in the middle of his mother's financial chaos. He was smart, tech-savvy, and unfortunately, had learned from Jenna that money was an abstract concept that magically appeared when needed. For his birthday, I gave him a prepaid debit card with $50 on it, hoping to teach him about limits and spending. Jenna had laughed. "Why not just link him to your Apple Pay?" she'd suggested. "It's so much easier." I refused, explaining the concept of a budget. The lesson, it seemed, didn't stick. The system limped along for about a year. I'd receive a notification that Jenna's account was down to $5, transfer $100 from a separate account I funded for this purpose, and text her a reminder to track her spending. She'd reply with a heart emoji and nothing would change. My mother praised my generosity, telling her friends how wonderful it was that I took care of my sister. She never framed it as Jenna's failure to take care of herself. In their eyes, I wasn't fixing a problem, I was fulfilling my role. I was the stable one, the provider. They were the free S. Pirates, the dreamers. Our roles were set in stone, and any attempt to deviate was met with confusion and emotional guilt. "But that's just how you've always been," my mother would say, as if my personality was a permanent, non-negotiable service she was entitled to. My job involved preventing digital breaches. I spent 40 hours a week building walls, setting traps, and analyzing threats to protect millions of dollars for people I'd never met. I was an expert at identifying vulnerabilities. The irony was suffocating. I had spent years securing a massive corporate network, yet the biggest vulnerability in my own life was my family, and I had willingly given them the password. I had justified it as love, as responsibility. I told myself I was keeping them safe. But as I'd soon find out, a safety net is useless when the people you're trying to catch are determined to cut through the ropes with your own scissors. The peace was not just fragile, it was an illusion. And it was about to be shattered by a single, seemingly innocent transaction. The text arrived at 10:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. It was from Leo. "Hey Aunt Molly, Mom said it was okay. I just used her card for snacks." I was on my couch, winding down after a long day of debugging a new security protocol. Seeing his name pop up wasn't unusual. He'd sometimes text me memes or ask for help with his math homework. The message itself, however, sent a small jolt of unease through me. My card? I hadn't given him my card number. I assumed he meant the joint account I managed for his mother, the one I kept a small buffer in for emergencies. I texted back, "Which card, buddy? And what did you get?" His reply came a minute later. "The one saved on the game store, just some power-ups. Night." The unease sharpened into a real flicker of alarm. The game store he was referring to was a massive online platform where kids could buy virtual items for their favorite games. These platforms were notorious for encouraging rapid, small purchases that could add up quickly. I had explicitly told Jenna not to save any card details to Leo's gaming account for this very reason. I had even shown her how to enable parental controls and spending limits. Clearly, she hadn't listened. "Leo, how much did you spend?" I typed, my fingers moving faster now. No reply, he had likely gone to bed. Sighing, I opened my banking app. I expected to see a few small charges, maybe $20 or $30. Annoying, but manageable. I'd have another talk with Jenna in the morning about responsibility. I navigated to the shared accounts transaction history. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't a few small charges. It was a deluge. There were dozens of them, all from the same gaming platform. $49.99, $99.99, $19.99, $49.99. They were timestamped just minutes apart, a rapid-fire assault on the account balance. My mind raced, trying to process the sheer volume. It was like watching a denial-of-service attack, but instead of overwhelming a server, it was draining a bank account. I scrolled and scrolled, my thumb moving frantically down the screen. The list seemed endless. These weren't snacks. This was a feeding frenzy. I quickly did the math in my head, my heart pounding against my ribs. It was bad, very bad. The buffer I kept in that account was gone. The overdraft protection had kicked in and the charges were still coming. But then I saw the transaction that made my blood run cold. It wasn't from the shared account. It was from my personal savings account, my emergency fund, my down payment for a future house. A single, massive charge of $7,500. I couldn't understand how. That account was firewalled. It was linked to nothing. It had a different password, multi-factor authentication tied to my fingerprint, and alerts set for any transaction over $1,000. I received no alert, no email, no text message. It was impossible. Unless... My mind flashed back to a few weeks prior. Jenna's laptop had crashed. She brought it to me in a panic, on the verge of tears because she had a client proposal due. "I can't afford a new one right now, Molly, please," she had begged. "Can you just fix it?" I spent an entire Saturday rebuilding it for her. I had to log into my own administrator account on her machine to run some diagnostic tools. I was careful, logging out of everything afterward, clearing the cache, running a security sweep. But I must have missed something. A saved token, a browser credential, an autofill profile. Jenna must have then saved that information to her own browser, which was linked to her Google account, which was logged in on Leo's tablet. It was a chain of security failures born from convenience and carelessness. My carelessness. I had broken my own cardinal rule: never mix personal and professional credentials on an untrusted device. And my sister's laptop was the least trusted device I could imagine. The full picture began to form, sickening in its clarity. Leo had started with small purchases on the shared account. When that ran dry and the overdraft kicked in, the gaming platform must have defaulted to another payment method saved in the browser's autofill. My payment method. My personal debit card, linked directly to my life savings. And Leo, being a 12-year-old on a mission for virtual glory, just kept clicking confirm purchase. He likely had no concept of the difference between the accounts. To him, it was just a button that gave him what he wanted. I stayed up for the next 3 hours, my living room lit only by the cold glow of my laptop screen. I meticulously documented every transaction, taking screenshots, noting times, and calculating the total damage. The final number was staggering. Between the shared account and my personal savings, Leo had spent $10,247.38 in under an hour. $10,000 on virtual coins, skins, and power-ups that existed only as pixels on a screen. I felt a strange, chilling calm descend over me. The panic was gone, replaced by a cold, hard certainty. This wasn't just a kid making a mistake. This was the inevitable result of years of enabling, of blurred lines, of a total abdication of responsibility by my sister and my mother. Leo was the one who clicked the button, but Jenna had loaded the weapon and handed it to him, and my mother had always assured her she'd never have to face the consequences. This time, I thought, staring at the gaping hole in my savings, would have to be different. The unofficial bank of Molly was officially closed, and the owners of its debt were about to receive the most aggressive collection notice of their lives. I didn't sleep. By the time the sun started to filter through my blinds, I had a complete dossier of the financial carnage, a spreadsheet, a timeline, and a folder of screenshots. I wasn't just angry anymore, I was methodical. This was a security breach, and I was treating it as such. The first step in any breach protocol is to contain the threat. The second is to assess the damage. The third is to notify the stakeholders. At 7:30 a.m., I drove to my mother's house. I had called a family meeting. I told them it was an emergency, my voice flat and devoid of emotion over the phone. Jenna was already there when I arrived, sitting at the kitchen table sipping a cup of herbal tea. Leo was on the couch in the living room, playing on his tablet, the very same device used to detonate a financial bomb in my life. He looked up, gave me a cheerful "Morning, Aunt Molly," and went right back to his game, oblivious. My mother, Diane, was bustling around the kitchen, her face etched with a mild, performative concern. "Molly, darling, you sounded so serious on the phone. Is everything all right?" I didn't answer. I walked over to the kitchen table, opened my laptop, and turned it around for them to see. On the screen was the spreadsheet I'd created. It had columns for transaction time, amount, and a running total that culminated in a bold, red number at the bottom: $10, $247.38. Jenna squinted at the screen. "What is all that? Some kind of work thing?" "No, Jenna," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "This is not a work thing. This is the amount of money Leo spent last night on a video game using my bank accounts." Jenna's casual demeanor evaporated. She leaned forward, her eyes scanning the numbers. "What? No, that's impossible. He said he was just getting some snacks." "He called them snacks," I corrected. "They were in-game purchases, 117 of them to be exact, ranging from $19 to $99 apiece. and one, for some reason, for $7,500. My mother came over, placing a hand on Jenna's shoulder. She peered at the screen, her brow furrowed. "Oh my, that is a lot of money. Leo," she called out, her voice gentle. "Did you do this?" Leo shuffled into the kitchen, not looking up from his tablet. "Did what?" "Did you spend all this money on your game?" Jenna asked, her voice rising with a frantic edge. Leo finally looked up, a flicker of fear in his eyes. "I don't know, I just clicked the buttons. You said I could get some power-ups." "I meant with your allowance," Jenna shot back, her voice defensive. "Not this." "It used the saved card," Leo mumbled, his gaze dropping to the floor. "The one you used to get my new shoes last week." Jenna's face went pale. She looked at me, understanding dawning in her eyes. It was my card information, auto-filled from when I'd fixed her laptop. She had used it, saved it, and never thought twice about the consequences. I closed the laptop. "The how is irrelevant at this point," I said, cutting through their budding argument. "The result is what matters. $10,000 has been taken from my accounts. My savings account is nearly empty. I need that money back, immediately." This was the moment where my family could have stepped up, shown remorse, and taken ownership. It was a crossroads, and they took the wrong path. My mother was the first to speak. She wrapped an arm around Leo, pulling him into a protective hug. "Oh, Molly, don't be so dramatic," she said, her tones soft and chiding. "He's just a child. He didn't understand what he was doing. Kids will be kids." I stared at her, dumbfounded. For a woman who had worked at a bank for 30 years, her willful ignorance of financial reality was astounding. "Mom, this isn't about him being a kid. This is about $10,000. That's not a kids will be kids mistake. That's a catastrophic failure of supervision." "Well, he certainly didn't mean to do it," Diane continued, stroking Leo's hair. "You can't punish a child for an honest mistake." Jenna, seeing her escape route, latched onto our mother's line of reasoning. "She's right, Molly. It was an accident. We'll figure it out. I can pay you back in installments." "Installments?" I repeated, my voice dangerously low. "Jenna, at your current rate of repayment for the other money you owe me, you'll have this paid off sometime in the 22nd century. I need the money now. I have bills. I have a mortgage. That money was for my future." "Don't use that tone with your sister," my mother snapped, her gentle facade cracking. "You're the one with the big, important job. You have plenty of money. For you, this is an inconvenience. For Jenna, trying to pay it all back at once would be devastating. You have to be reasonable." I felt a profound sense of detachment, as if I were floating above the scene, watching three strangers act out a play about entitlement. They weren't seeing me, their daughter, their sister. They were seeing a resource, an ATM that was suddenly demanding its money back. "So your solution," I said, spelling it out slowly, "is that I should absorb a $10,000 loss because Leo made a mistake. Jenna can't afford to fix it, and I can. Is that the family plan?" "It's not a loss, Molly, it's family," Jenna said, her voice dripping with self-pity. "We're supposed to help each other. I would do the same for you if the roles were reversed." The sheer audacity of that lie almost made me laugh. I stood up, my chair scraping against the linoleum floor. "No, you wouldn't," I said, my voice cold and clear. "Let's be honest. If my son spent $10,000 of your money, you'd be demanding my head on a platter. But you know I'd pay it back instantly, because it's called responsibility." I looked from my sister's defiant face to my mother's disappointed one. They had already formed a united front against me. I was the villain for demanding accountability. Leo, the one who actually spent the money, was being cuddled on the couch. Jenna, whose negligence caused the entire fiasco, was the victim. And I was the cold, heartless money grabber who didn't understand the sanctity of family. "Fine," I said, picking up my laptop. "I see how it is." "Molly, wait," my mother said. "Let's not fight. We can talk about this later when you've calmed down." "I am calm," I replied, turning to face them one last time. "I have all the information I need." As I walked out the door, I heard my mother comforting my sister. "Don't worry, sweetheart. She'll come around. She just needs some time to cool off." They had no idea. I wasn't cooling off. I was hardening. They had made their position clear. Now it was time for me to make mine. The breach had been identified. The stakeholders had been notified and had refused to cooperate. It was time to execute the final step of the protocol, neutralize the threat, and secure the assets. Returning to the sterile quiet of my condo felt like entering a command center after a failed diplomatic mission. The emotional turmoil of the morning, the disbelief, the anger, the profound disappointment, was now being channeled into what I did best: a meticulous, data-driven investigation. My family had dismissed the situation with platitudes and deflections. I was going to respond with cold, hard facts. My goal was no longer just about getting my money back from them directly. It was about understanding the full scope of the breach and using that information to seize control. I started where the damage began, the gaming platform. I created a temporary account to navigate its ecosystem. It was a digital candy store for kids, a vibrant, noisy world of flashing lights and constant prompts to level up or unlock exclusive content with the click of a button. It was designed to be frictionless, to separate a child from their parents' money as efficiently as possible. I saw how Leo, caught up in the excitement, could have lost track of reality. But the platform's design didn't excuse the lack of oversight. My first step was to contact the company's customer support. I outlined the situation in a carefully worded email, stating that the charges were made by a minor without authorization from the cardholder. I attached the spreadsheet of transactions and explained that the payment information was saved and used without my consent due to a security vulnerability on a third-party device. I requested a full refund in accordance with their terms of service regarding unauthorized purchases by minors. I knew this was a long shot. Companies like this often hid behind clauses that placed all responsibility on the user for securing their account. But it was a necessary first step, a formal record of my attempt to resolve the issue through official channels. While I waited for a response, which I anticipated would be a generic rejection, I moved on to the next phase of my investigation: a full digital audit of my sister and mother. My access to their bank accounts was my entry point. It was originally intended for me to deposit money, but the permissions I had also allowed me to view their financial landscape in granular detail. It was a level of access I rarely used, respecting their privacy. That respect was now gone. I started with Jenna. Her transaction history was a chaotic map of her life. Small incomes from yoga classes were quickly swallowed by expenses that betrayed her Zen lifestyle: expensive organic groceries, boutique fitness classes, online orders from fast fashion websites, and countless cafe purchases. There was no savings, no planning, just a steady cycle of spending until the money ran out, at which point she would invariably turn to me or my mother. I saw the small, regular transfers from my mother's pension account to Jenna's checking, propping her up between my own contributions. My mother wasn't just enabling her with words. She was a silent financial partner in her irresponsibility. This discovery was crucial. My mother's claim that I should bear the cost because I could afford it was pure hypocrisy. She was also funding Jenna's lifestyle, just in smaller, less noticeable increments. Her pension was modest. These contributions were a significant portion of her fixed income. She was sacrificing her own financial security for Jenna's comfort, all while judging me for not wanting to sacrifice mine. Then I dug deeper. Using the linked account information, I was able to see the bills they paid automatically each month: utilities, car payments, insurance. I cross-referenced these with public records and online portals. I wasn't hacking them. I was simply following a trail of digital breadcrumbs they had left wide open, using information I was already privy to. I mapped out their entire financial ecosystem. I knew their monthly income, their fixed expenses, their debts, and their payment schedules. I knew which credit cards were tied to which accounts and what the current balances were. Jenna had 3 credit cards, all nearly maxed out. Her car loan was from a predatory lender with an absurdly high interest rate. Her cell phone plan was a family plan, bundled with our mother S. Everything was interconnected, a fragile web held together by my emergency transfers and my mother's pension. They were living perpetually on the edge of financial collapse, and they didn't even seem to know it, cushioned by the belief that I would always be there to catch them. The most damning discovery came from the gaming platform itself. They responded to my ticket faster than I expected, with a predictable, template-based denial of a refund. However, they did provide a detailed log of the purchases as an appendix. The log included IP addresses. I ran a check on the IPs associated with the transactions. Most of them traced back to my mother's home Wi-Fi network, as expected. But a few of the larger purchases, including the massive $7,501, traced back to a different IP address, one from a local coffee shop with free public Wi-Fi. My blood went cold. A 12-year-old wouldn't take his tablet to a coffee shop at 10 p.m. to buy gaming credits, but a mother trying to meet a proposal deadline might. I checked the timestamps. They aligned perfectly with the week Jenna had borrowed her fixed laptop back from me. She hadn't just used my card information to buy shoes for Leo. She had been the one to make some of the purchases herself. Maybe she was testing it, or maybe she was buying something for herself and disguising it as Leo's gaming spree. The $7,500 transaction wasn't for in-game currency. The transaction description was for developer software. It was the exact software suite she needed for her event planning gigs. She had lied. It wasn't just Leo's mistake. It was fraud. Jenna had used the situation as cover to solve her own business problem, knowing Leo's snack purchases would muddy the waters. She was willing to let her own son take the fall for her deliberate, calculated theft. This changed everything. This was no longer about negligence. It was a malicious act. My sister had stolen from me and was prepared to hide behind her child and my mother's excuses. The family meeting wasn't just a scene of entitlement. It was an active cover-up. I leaned back in my chair, the glow of the monitor reflecting in my eyes. The investigation was complete. The evidence was irrefutable. My quiet, methodical anger had now solidified into something cold and sharp. They thought I was just an ATM. They were about to find out what happens when you try to defraud a cybersecurity analyst. They had built their lives on my foundation of support. It was time to show them what it felt like when that foundation was removed, brick by digital brick. The evidence I had uncovered shifted the emotional calculus of the situation entirely. This was no longer a family dispute about money. It was a calculated betrayal that required a calculated response. My grief over their actions turned into fuel. For the next 24 hours, I became a ghost in their digital lives, moving silently through the interconnected accounts and services that I had once set up to protect them. Now, I would use that same architecture to dismantle their financial stability. My objective was simple: create a crisis so total and so immediate that it would force them to confront the reality they had so casually dismissed. I called it Operation Financial Lockdown. My authority on their accounts was the key. Years ago, they had signed the necessary paperwork at the bank to give me full transactional and administrative privileges, a decision they made out of convenience and which they had long since forgotten. They thought it just meant I could see their balance. They had no idea it gave me the power to act as if I were them. Phase 1 began at midnight. I started with the source of the problem, the credit and debit cards. I logged into Jenna's online banking portal. Her debit card, linked to the shared account, was first. With 3 clicks, I reported it as lost or stolen and requested a new one be mailed to her address. The existing card was instantly deactivated. The new one would take 7 to 10 business days to arrive. Next, I went through her credit card accounts. For each one, I used the freeze card feature, a temporary lock that prevents all new transactions. One by one, I clicked the button. Her ability to make electronic payments was now crippled. Then I turned to my mother. Her financial life was simpler, but just as vulnerable. She had 1 credit card and 1 debit card. I did the same thing, reported her debit card as compromised, and froze her credit card. In the space of about 15 minutes, I had effectively cut off their access to immediate funds. They had whatever cash was in their wallets, and that was it. Phase 2 was about disrupting the flow of money. I went back into their accounts and targeted the automatic bill payments I had so carefully mapped out. Jenna's exorbitant car payment was scheduled to come out in 2 days. I logged in and canceled the autopay. Her cell phone bill, part of the family plan with my mother, was also due. Canceled. Her streaming services, her gym membership, her online grocery delivery, all of it severed. I did the same for my mother's accounts, canceling the autopay for her utilities, her insurance, and her cable bill. I didn't stop the payments from being due. I simply removed the automated convenience that ensured they were paid on time. They would now have to manually pay each bill, a task they were ill-equipped for, with cards that no longer worked. Phase 3 was the most critical. It was about redirecting their assets to cover my losses. This was the part where I moved from defense to offense. I logged into my mother's account and looked at the small, regular transfers she was sending to Jenna. I set up a new automatic transfer. Starting immediately, the same amount she sent to Jenna each month would now be redirected to my personal savings account. The transaction description read, "Partial repayment loan ID 10,247. I did the same for Jenna's account. Any incoming payment, a deposit from a yoga client, a transfer from a friend, would trigger an automatic sweep of 80% of the funds into my account with the same description. I was no longer asking for my money, I was garnishing it at the source. The final piece of the plan was designed to create confusion and force them to confront the system they had taken for granted. I changed the online banking passwords for both of their accounts. I didn't lock them out completely. I changed the passwords to something complex but memorable, something that would point directly to the heart of the issue. For Jenna, the new password was Leo spent 10247. For my mother, it was Kids Are Accountable. They would likely try their old passwords a few times, get locked out, and then have to go through the password recovery process. When they finally regained access, the new password would be a stark, unavoidable reminder of what they had done. As I executed the final command, I felt a strange sense of calm. There was no joy or satisfaction in it, only a grim sense of necessity. I was performing a controlled demolition. Their financial lives were a poorly constructed house of cards, and I was removing the one card at the bottom that held the whole thing up, me. They had used my kindness and competence as a permanent scaffold, allowing them to build ever higher without a solid foundation. I documented every action I took, taking screenshots and writing detailed notes with timestamps. I was treating this as a professional operation. If they chose to escalate this legally, I would have a clear and precise record showing that every action was taken using legitimate access I had been granted and was for the sole purpose of recouping stolen funds. I wasn't stealing from them. I was collecting a debt they refused to acknowledge. By 4 a.m., Operation Financial Lockdown was complete. I closed my laptop and looked around my silent condo. The world outside was still dark and quiet, but I knew that in just a few short hours, a storm of my own making would erupt in my mother's cozy little kitchen. Jenna likely woke up early for her yoga sessions. She'd probably try to buy a coffee on her way. Her card would be declined. Confused, she would open her banking app to check the balance. And then she would see. She would see it all. The frozen cards, the canceled payments, the redirected funds, and she would scream. I set my phone to silent, but I kept it on my nightstand. I knew a call was coming. The only question was from whom. The morning after I executed Operation Financial Lockdown, I woke up with a feeling of unnerving tranquility. I had expected to be anxious, to be staring at my phone, waiting for the inevitable explosion. Instead, I felt a profound sense of release. For the first time in years, the weight of my family's financial chaos was not my problem to solve. I had built a firewall, and now I was simply waiting to see what would happen when they ran into it at full speed. I made coffee and went through my normal morning routine, a deliberate act of normalcy in a situation that was anything but. I logged into my work computer and started my day, immersing myself in lines of code and security protocols. It was a comfort, this world of logic and clear rules, a stark contrast to the messy, emotional illogic of my family. The first sign that the storm had made landfall came at 6:02 a.m. It was a text from Jenna. A single question mark. I looked at it and felt nothing. I didn't respond. A minute later, another text. Did you do something to my account? My card was just declined. Again, silence from my end. Then, a rapid-fire succession of messages. Molly, what is going on? I can't log into my bank app. It's saying my password is wrong. Molly, answer me. My credit cards aren't working either. This was the initial panic, the confusion before the full realization hit. She was at a coffee shop, embarrassed and annoyed, thinking it was a simple technical glitch. She hadn't yet grasped the scale of what was happening. I continued my work, my focus absolute. I could picture her perfectly, standing on the sidewalk, stabbing at her phone screen with increasing frustration. I imagined her calling our mother, her voice high-pitched and frantic. At 6:15 a.m., my phone began to ring. It was my mother. I let it go to voicemail. A message notification popped up immediately. I didn't listen to it. The phone rang again, and again. On the fourth try, I declined the call. The texts started coming from both of them now, a chaotic duet of accusation and panic. From Mom, Molly, call me immediately. This is not funny. Jenna is very upset. From Jenna, I see what you did. You froze everything. You have no right. From Mom, your sister can't buy gas to get to work. You need to fix this right now. From Jenna, I'm going to the bank. I'll tell them you stole my password. I almost smiled at that last one. She could go to the bank. They would pull up the account, see that I was a fully authorized user, and politely inform her there was nothing they could do. I hadn't broken any rules. I had simply used the system they themselves had created. The real moment I was waiting for was when they finally managed to reset their passwords and saw. The new ones I had set, that was the message, that was the confrontation. The rest of this was just noise. Around 7:00 a.m., the texts abruptly stopped. A full 20 minutes of silence. I knew what was happening. One of them had successfully navigated the password recovery process. They had answered the security questions I knew the answers to, like, what was the name of your first pet? And had been prompted to create a new password, except they didn't have to create one. I had already done it for them. I could almost hear the gears turning in their heads as they typed in Leo spent 10247 or kids are accountable. The moment of dawning horror. The realization that this wasn't a glitch or a mistake. This was a deliberate, targeted action. It was a message, delivered with the cold precision of a line of code. At 7:21 a.m., a new text from Jenna appeared. The tone was completely different. The frantic anger was gone, replaced by something that sounded like cold fury. You think you're so clever. You will regret this, Molly. Mom is on her way to your condo right now. I glanced at the security camera feed for my front door on a small monitor on my desk. Sure enough, my mother's car was pulling into the visitor parking spot. I watched as she got out, her face a mask of grim determination. She marched up to my door and began pounding on it, not with the polite knock of a guest, but with the flat of her palm, like she was trying to break it down. I didn't move. I just sat at my desk, watching her on the monitor. She was yelling my name, her voice muffled through the door. Molly, open this door. We need to talk about this. This has gone far enough. But it hadn't. It hadn't gone nearly far enough. Talking to them meant being cornered, emotionally manipulated, and guilted into submission. It meant listening to my mother tell me to be the bigger person while my sister stood by silently, the beneficiary of my forced generosity. I had been talking to them for over a decade. The time for talk was over. Now was the time for consequences. After 5 minutes of unanswered pounding, my mother sagged against the doorframe, defeated. She pulled out her phone, and I saw her typing furiously. A moment later, a new text message appeared on my screen. From Mom, I have never been so disappointed in you. You are tearing this family apart over money. Your father would be ashamed. That was the line, the one they always used when they were losing an argument, invoking the memory of my deceased father, a man who valued integrity and personal responsibility above all else. He would not be ashamed of me. He would be appalled by them. I watched her walk back to her car and drive away. The silence that followed was heavy. The initial storm of frantic texts and angry pounding had passed. Now came the quiet, the part where the reality of their situation began to sink in. Their cards didn't work. Their bills were coming due. Their income was being garnished. They had no access to the bank of Molly. They were completely, utterly on their own. For the rest of the day, there was nothing. No calls, no texts, just a profound and deafening silence. I knew they were talking to each other, planning, trying to figure a way out of the trap I had sprung. They were likely exploring their options, calling the bank, perhaps even consulting a lawyer. But every door would close in their face. I had been meticulous. I had used their own permissions, their own system, against them. As evening fell, I finally allowed myself to feel the emotional toll of the day. It was a victory, but a hollow one. I had proven my point. I had seized control. But I had also likely shattered my family beyond repair. Was it worth it? Staring at the $10,000 hole in my savings, remembering my mother's dismissive words, "Kids will be kids," and picturing Jenna's deceitful face, I knew the answer. Yes, it was. Some things have to be broken before they can be fixed. And some things, once broken, are better left that way. The silence continued through the night. The next morning, I woke up, and for a moment, I wondered if it was over. Maybe they had accepted defeat. Maybe they were finally ready to talk, to apologize, to take responsibility. Then, at 8:10 a.m., my phone rang. The caller ID was an unknown number, a corporate line from downtown. The silence was broken, and I knew, with absolute certainty, that this was the call that would change everything. I looked at the unknown number on my screen, my heart giving a slight, steady thump. This was Jenna's panicked rage or my mother's emotional blackmail. This was something different. This was official. My first thought was that they had gone to the police, but that seemed unlikely. Filing a police report would mean admitting their own culpability, Jenna's negligence, Leo's actions, and the theft of the software. My next thought was a lawyer, but again, that would be a costly and losing battle for them. This call felt like something else entirely. I took a deep breath, steeled myself, and answered. "This is Molly speaking." "Good morning, Ms. Molly," a calm, professional voice said on the other end. "My name is Mr. Harrison. I'm a senior investigator with the fraud department at your bank. I'm calling regarding some unusual activity on several accounts that you have administrative access to. Do you have a few minutes to speak?" My mind raced. Mr. Harrison, the bank's fraud department. They must have been flagged by my flurry of activity, the frozen cards, the password changes, the new fund transfers. The system I worked with every day was now being turned on me. "I do, Mr. Harrison," I replied, my voice even. "I'm aware of the activity. I initiated it." There was a brief pause on the other end. "You initiated the card freezes and fund transfers from the accounts of Diane and Jenna?" he asked, his tone careful. "That's correct," I said. "I am a fully authorized user on both accounts with administrative privileges. The account holders can confirm this." "They have," Mr. Harrison said, and I could hear the faint sound of typing. "They are actually the ones who flagged this. They came into a branch this morning claiming they had been locked out of their accounts and that unauthorized transfers were being made. Naturally, when we saw the transfers were going to an account in your name, an account also linked to theirs, it raised some red flags for us. So that was their play. To paint me as a rogue agent abusing my access. It was clever, but they were amateurs." "Mr. Harrison," I said calmly, "the transfers are not unauthorized. They are debt collections. A sum of $10,247.38 was charged to my personal accounts without my consent, originating from devices belonging to my sister, Jenna. When she and my mother, Diane, refused to take responsibility for the debt, I used my legitimate access to their accounts to set up a repayment plan. I have a full record of the unauthorized charges, as well as documentation of my attempts to resolve this with them directly. Another pause, longer this time. Ms. Molly, that is a very serious allegation. You're claiming that over $10,000 was effectively stolen from you, and you've resorted to self-help to recover it. I've resorted to the privileges the account holders granted me to collect a verifiable debt they refused to honor, I corrected him. It's all in the transaction history. You can see the string of purchases from the gaming platform, followed by the large software purchase. You can also see that I immediately contacted the gaming company to dispute the charges, a request they denied. I have the entire digital paper trail. I could hear him typing again, the clicks sharp and precise. I'm looking at the charges now, he said, his voice shifting from procedural to intrigued. Particularly the one for $7,500 for developer software. That seems like an outlier compared to the others. It is, I said. And I have IP logs from the gaming company showing that transaction was not made from their home network, but from a public Wi-Fi hotspot at a time when my nephew would have been at home. The purchase was made by my sister, who needed that specific software for her freelance business. She hid a fraudulent purchase for her own benefit within a series of her son's unauthorized transactions. The line was silent for a full 30 seconds. I knew what he was doing. He was cross-referencing everything, the timestamps, the merchant codes, the IP data if he had access to it. He was connecting the dots. Ms. Molly, he finally said, his voice now holding a new weight, your access to their accounts is legitimate. Your actions, while unorthodox, appear to fall within the administrative rights you were granted. However, the situation you're describing, this is more than just a family dispute over money. The deliberate purchase of the software, disguised as a child's mistake, that is textbook bank fraud. My breath caught. I had been so focused on my own form of justice that I hadn't considered the bank's perspective. I wasn't the only victim. The bank itself had been exposed to risk through Jenna's actions. Ordinarily, Mr. Harrison continued, in a case of family fraud, we encourage private resolution. But given the amount and the clear evidence of intentional deception you're presenting, this now falls under my department's mandate to investigate. Your sister didn't just use your money. She used the banking system to commit a crime. He explained the next steps. The bank would be launching a formal investigation into Jenna. They would be freezing her accounts, for real this time, not just the cards. They would likely contact the gaming company and the software vendor. They would want a formal statement from me. They would also want to speak with Jenna. She and your mother are still at the branch, he said. I believe a branch manager is explaining to them now that their complaint has been escalated to my department. I imagine they're not having a pleasant morning. A slow, cold wave of vindication washed over me. It was better than I could have ever planned. I had wanted to teach them a lesson in responsibility. But now, the consequences were no longer coming from me, the disappointing daughter. They were coming from the institution they had tried to use as a weapon against me. I will cooperate fully, I said. 2 days later, I sat in a sterile office at the bank's corporate headquarters, giving my formal statement to Mr. Harrison. He was a sharp, no-nonsense man who listened intently as I laid out the entire story, supported by my folder of evidence. The aftermath was swift and brutal. The bank's investigation concluded that Jenna had committed fraud. They closed her accounts and reported her to the national credit bureaus, destroying her already fragile credit score. Because the software was digital, they couldn't recover the funds, but they legally held her liable for the debt. Faced with potential legal action from the bank, my mother drained her small retirement savings to pay back the $7,500 for the software. She used the rest of the money to pay me back for the damage Leo had done. It almost wiped her out completely. Jenna lost her freelance business. She couldn't afford the software license renewal. She had to sell her car to cover her living expenses and now relies on the bus. She and my mother had to move into a small, two-bedroom apartment to save money. I have not spoken to either of them since I gave my statement. My mother left me one final, tearful voicemail accusing me of ruining their lives. She said she would never forgive me. I didn't respond. My life is quiet now. The money is back in my savings account, but the cost was my family. Sometimes I wonder if I went too far, if there was another way. But then I remember my mother's voice on the phone, so casually dismissing the theft of my financial security. I remember my sister's face, so full of indignant rage when she was caught. They didn't see me as a person, they saw me as a utility. My actions weren't revenge, they were a system correction. I simply cut off the supply to a part of the network that had been corrupted. I built a firewall and it worked. I am secure. And I am finally, completely on my own.